Hi, I'm Claire Mitchell, QC. Welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. I'm a lawyer who specialises in miscarriage of justice cases, and we're bringing you this podcast because we want to tell you about the women who were accused, prosecuted, convicted, and ultimately executed as witches in Scotland.
I'm Zoe Venditozzi, and I'm a writer who's always had an interest in the witches, and I feel that this dark mark against Scotland needs a reckoning.
The campaign Witches of Scotland wants three things. Firstly, a pardon for all those convicted of witchcraft. Secondly, an apology for all those who were accused as witches. And finally, a national monument in recognition of all those who are affected by this terrible miscarriage of justice.
Over the forthcoming weeks, we'll be talking to a whole host of experts about the history and the modern day connections to the Witches of Scotland. Hello, and welcome to the Witches of Scotland podcast. We are delighted to be bringing to you today somebody that we've wanted to talk to for a long time, and we finally managed to make our diaries coincide. So that'll be very exciting. How are you today, Claire?
I'm good. I'm kind of thrown by the fact that you've not identified which number our podcast is and expressed your surprise.
I just can't bear it. I can't bear the fact that we're at the number of my age.
That's lies. That's lies, and you know it. Are you doing that reverse aging thing so people go, she looks very good for 74? Is that what you're
doing? No, I'm not doing that. I'm actually just like, obviously, just as usual, just as shocked that not only that we've got up to the number we've got up to, but that I have committed to sticking with something for so long, which is just so not like me. So I will mention the number of the podcast today. It is episode 56, which is only 50 past what we said it was going to be. Only an extra 50, David. Sorry. Poor David.
Hashtag sorry, David. Someone put that up on Twitter. It's really funny. Hashtag sorry, David. So, yes, we have someone really, really exciting come up. But before that,
so just, obviously, Claire, I have the question to ask you, which is, what's happening in the news?
Well,
what's going on?
Well, loads is going on. So, since the last time you spoke to us, Zoe and I went to the Scotswoman of the Year award. We were finalists in that, and it was amazing to have been asked. And we went through to Glasgow and had a most fantastic afternoon where we met some of the other finalists, not all of them, because not all of them could be in the room at the same time. But we met many of the other finalists for Scotswoman of the Year and Young Scotswoman of the Year, which was brilliant. And at the final, the winners were announced. Now, we didn't win. I think it would be fair to say, unsurprisingly, Zoe, to ourselves.
We were not surprised. Now, I did that thing, that sort of classic Scottish thing of going, well, we're not going to win it anyway. I kept saying to Claire, we're not going to win it. We're not going to win it. But I didn't really think we were going to win it. I had my money on one person and Claire had her money on another person, and Claire won. Claire won the bet. The winner was very worthy, I would say, in both categories, but the winner for the Scottish Woman of the Year was somebody who I think is doing something that actually is really, really important. And so who was that, Claire?
That was Maureen Potter. Maureen Potter was a primary school teacher, now long retired. She recently celebrated her 80th birthday. And what she has been doing for a number of years, 16 years in particular, is providing what was described as her single-minded dedication to protecting and preserving Scotland's natural spaces. And I give a shout out there to Anne Fotheringham, who was there on the day and presented the award. And I'm also reading from one of the articles that she has written about Maureen Potter. What Maureen did was she's been the driving force behind a campaigning group called Friends of Langlands Moss to help raise awareness of the importance of vital peat bogs, which store carbon and help cool the atmosphere. And her work has transformed Langlands Moss into a globally important natural reserve at the forefront of the fight against climate change. So thank you very much to Anne Fotheringham for her words there, and well done to Maureen. The Young Scotswoman of the Year is Mariah Jared. Mariah is just 12 years old, but as Anne Fotheringham says, has already made an impact in her community. Very sadly, her brother died 5 years ago of a rare condition. And since that time, she has worked tirelessly to raise money for a charity called Another Star in the Sky. That's a fund set up by her parents in association with Glasgow Children's Hospital Charity. She's raised more than £16,500 for two things: to do research into rare conditions and also to fund bereavement support services. So we met both of them, and I think you can see each in their own way, very inspiring people.
Yeah, absolutely. Really fantastic that they both won. It's amazing, actually, the range of things that people were doing for different campaigns. There was education, there was sport, there was obviously environmental, there's what we're doing, there were health issues that were being highlighted. It was really nice to see that there's people, like just ordinary people like us, that are just passionate about a subject, passionate about some form of campaign, and are able to raise interest in it. And it might be for fundraising, it might be to educate people, it might be to encourage other people to join in. And it's just really nice to see people making a difference like that.
What I noticed was there was a high number of teachers involved in it.
Well, me and Maureen and Samiha she's involved in education. Is she a teacher, or is she just involved in education? I'm not sure.
No, just involved in education, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's because if you want stuff done, give the job to a busy woman, I think.
Absolutely true, absolutely true.
Yeah.
And we should give a shout out as well to Samiha's charity called Ubuntu.
Ubuntu, yeah. So they're doing really interesting stuff with young people that are in kinship care to make sure they have the same chances in education as children that are with their families. So I think anything that helps the young people in Scotland to fulfil their promise, I'm all for that. That's who my money was on. I thought that Samiha might win, but she's only young though. She's in her early 20s. She's got plenty of time to win it again later in the future. So that was really cool. And it was just really nice to be able to say that we'd been shortlisted. Or never in a million years would have thought that I would ever be anywhere near a title like that. So it was pretty funny. I quite enjoyed that. Nice to have the bragging rights of it. It's quite cool. So that was nice. That was a lovely thing to do. And of course, brings more focus on the campaign, really. If it's in the papers down there and across Scotland, then it means that more people know about what it is that we're doing, which is really nice for us. But that aside, Claire, what about recent TV portrayals about the witch hunts?
Yeah, well, you and I have both spoken, Zoe, about our fear about a recent BBC comedy, and we were worried that it wouldn't be any good. And The Witchfinder on BBC, which you can get on iPlayer, we've now both watched it, and I really enjoyed it.
Yes, I thought it was actually found it quite moving. The last episode I found quite moving. It's funny. And Daisy May Cooper, that plays the accused witch, is totally brilliant. And she's just got such a great sort of sensible take on the whole situation. It's really interesting, and it shows that sort of the dodginess at the heart of some of the accusations of witchcraft, and about really what was motivating people sometimes. That was quite interesting. And great excitement. I'm really, really excited about this. So their historical consultant was Malcolm Gaskill, who anybody that follows anything sort of witchy will know about him. Malcolm Gaskill's most recent book is The Ruin of All Witches, which is fantastic. It's had great reviews. He's also written about Hellish Nell, Helen Duncan. So that's something that I need to get that book, get my hands on that book and read that at some point. But I'm very excited because we're going to have Malcolm on the podcast very soon. And I think he's totally brilliant. I think he gives great chat on Twitter. He's obviously a total expert and will be really fascinating to talk to. So we'll talk more about the Witchfinder maybe with him when he's on.
And we've got another couple of things still in the news. The next thing is that the consultation document in relation to the Private Members Bill is nearly finished. It'll probably be out by the time we have a next podcast in 2 weeks' time. So we will be tweeting, we will be putting it on Facebook, we will be putting it on Insta to get absolutely everyone who is interested in getting the pardon to write in and express their own views to the Scottish Government, because it's now at the stage where we've got it to the position that we're in, and public support is now needed for it to see whether or not that there is an appetite for it in Scotland.
Yeah, so that's very exciting. So for people that get in touch with us and say, can I sign your petition? Oh, I'm sorry to see your petition's closed, that sort of thing. What can I do to help? This is the next thing to do. So keep your eyes out and tell everybody that you know about it, especially if they're not really on the social media channels, so that we can get as many people as possible supporting us with the consultation, so that the government knows that there's an appetite for this from Scottish people. That's really exciting. It just feels really great. We've gained so much momentum with the campaign. So we've secured the apology. That was a month ago. It's funny, I was thinking about that. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but that was pretty much a month ago. And then the next stage, that's starting as well. And then we can start more meaningful discussion about what a national monument would look like and where it might be, and the involvement with that one. So we've got some quite interesting meetings coming up about that as well. So that will be cool, and we'll keep you posted. So today, as we do each episode, we're going to have a look at some individual cases so that we can name people that were accused of being witches. And today, of course, as usual, we're looking at the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, which was co-directed by Louise Yeoman. And the very first person we have today, it actually is quite strange, shares my mother's name almost. So the woman that we're talking about is Elspeth Johnston, but it's spelled Elsbeth. And she's from the parish of Medvin. Her place of residence was in Perth, and she was one of 25 Johnstons of varying spellings. Quite a common name, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, it is. And the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft says that there was an accusation in 1662. What's interesting about her case, and unfortunately, sadly, we don't have any details about whether or not she was convicted, but the commission by the Privy Council was issued after the accused had confessed. But the Privy Council urged caution because of the use of torture. What they said was that it was only if the accused was to confess voluntarily and be of both legal and mental competency to stand trial that they should face trial for witchcraft. So we see there an issue about whether or not a confession had truly been something which had been given voluntarily, and clearly there was a suggestion that it hadn't and she'd been tortured.
Sad story, but common story, unfortunately. There's another person here, isn't there, Claire?
Yes, the next person. So I looked up Johnstons as your maiden name to see if I could find any, because we were not going to find any Venditozzi accused people in Scotland at that time. And then I also looked up Mitchell, and indeed there are a number of people accused by the name of Mitchell, and I found the nearest to my name, which was Christian Mitchell, C. Mitchell, and I saw that that person was near in age to me as well, at the age of 53. Christian Mitchell was aged 53. She was widowed. Her husband had been a burgess of Aberdeen and a litster, and I looked that up, and that means a dyer of cloth. Her trial was in 1597 in Aberdeen. When Christian Mitchell was forced to confess, she said that Margaret Innes had asked her to join the company and she would want for nothing. So she was invited into the coven and saying, come along with us and you want for nothing. She agreed, but she said she wouldn't stay. When she said that, the devil hit her and she fell on her face and was bedridden for 80 days. So she's told a story of going along to the coven, saying, I won't stay, and the devil having assaulted her. She claimed that she and several other named witches danced with the devil. The dance was led by Thomas Lilias. She claimed that they rode on trees, and she was inducted into the devil's service by, as I said, the aforementioned Margaret Innes. She was accused of killing her son and daughter-in-law by witchcraft. When she was examined, she was said to have had the devil's mark on the back of her right hand. At that time, there were another 6 people accused of being witches, one of them including the third person we're going to mention today, called Isabel Barron. She cursed some women after disagreements, and that person later took ill and died. She was then said to have cursed a man who took ill, but he didn't die. But later, his property was damaged and he lost £1,000. So
£1,000, that must have been a lot of money then.
A huge amount then. What was said about her was that she seems to have been quite argumentative, as we've said before, a quarrelsome dame, and she quarrelled and cursed her neighbours. She was also named by Christian Mitchell as one of the people that she met. And very sadly, we know Isabel Barron to have been convicted of Witchcraft, and we know she was executed because there were financial notes in respect of her execution. So it's that follow the money.
Yeah.
You follow the financial reports of the time and you see the cost that it took to execute someone. That's how we're able to find out that these things had happened. So those are the people that we remember as Women Not Witches: Elspeth Johnston, Christian Mitchell and Isabel Barron.
So that brings us on to our guest today, who we're really, really looking forward to speaking to, and that's Louise Yeoman, who is well regarded across Scotland and out with Scotland for her work on various areas of history, but also very much on being co-director of the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft alongside Julian Goodare. So Louise Yeoman completed a PhD at the University of St Andrews on the subject of the Covenanters. And talking to Louise in preparation for today, she's got lots of areas of interest and has published lots and is really fascinating. I think we could probably do several episodes with Louise, but she is known for being involved, as I've said, with the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, for being involved with unearthing, essentially, Lilias Adie's place of burial at Torryburn, which is really interesting and definitely worth having a look at. And if your interest is piqued by that, you can always go back and listen to Douglas Spear's episode right back at the beginning of our podcasts, which tells the story of what he and Louise did. Louise is also a producer and a presenter at BBC Radio Scotland. She works on programmes including Time Travels, and she was involved with the Witch Hunt podcast series with Susan Morrison. She's also spoken out repeatedly about the courage of accused Scottish witches such as Lilias Adie. She's also keen to support the National Memorial and also is keen on local memorials to those that had been accused. She's published lots of different books about lots of different aspects of witch hunts. She worked with Julian Goodare on publishing some work there. She's published stuff in the Scottish Historical Review, lots of different publications there that are definitely worth having a look at. She's very, very interesting and a really great speaker. So I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Dr Louise Yeoman. So we are delighted to welcome Louise Yeoman to the podcast today. Hello, Louise.
Hiya.
We're so glad to get you because you are one of the very first names that we really ever heard of in connection with knowledge about the Scottish witch hunts. And you are the woman to get in touch with in Scotland. And we know it's been hard to pin you down because you're so busy between the different things that you do. So we're delighted that we've got you here today to have a chat with us. Now, your knowledge is vast.
I'm at the stage where I forget it all.
I like that. I'm gonna start saying that, and it wouldn't be true. I don't have vast knowledge, but I could pretend that I did.
No.
One day, once upon a time. But you really genuinely do have lots of different areas of interest that you look into. What is it that you started off as in your career? Like, did you start off as a historian, as a journalist? What is your background?
So I started off as a historian and I did a PhD on Covenanting piety. So this is like the inner world of the 17th century Presbyterians of Scotland, the ones that don't think you should have bishops, the ones that don't think the king should be the head of the church. I didn't set out, because this is way back in the Dark Ages, I did not set out to do women's history. And then women leapt off every page at me. And I said, whoa, who are all these sort of active, interesting women? And, you know, after my PhD, I ended up in libraries and archives, and, you know, you help the people who are looking at things. And, you know, my own training meant that I read 16th and 17th century manuscripts. And another historian came into what was then the little office at, they changed names so many times. I think they're now National Records of Scotland. Back then, Scottish Record Office, I am so old, and came in and said, oh, I think this is a witch case in a regality court. And I went, wow, because regality courts are private courts. They're not meant to try witch cases. And we looked at it, and this was Michael Wasser, Dr. Michael Wasser, a Canadian historian. And we got so excited because this was the case of Giles Johnston. And it turned out to be a really, really fascinating case where the person who tried it in his own regality court was the Earl of Dunfermline, Alexander Seton. And the reason he was doing it was to clamp down on witch trials. He was doing things which helped the accused woman to get her off. And he sat with this bench of what we call assessors, really important people as judges, because it was like, look, guys, this is how you're going to do it. And it was one of these things that blows your mind, because one of the things they did, which helped poor Gilles, was they banned women as witnesses. Now, you might say, that's terrible, that's sexist. But the thing is, in a very gendered society, women work alongside women. The people you fall out with are other women. So, here were all these other women going to say, yes, she is a witch. And, Dunfermline, because technically you weren't allowed to do this in the law of Scotland, said, oh, no, you don't. And the other people he banned were the presbytery. Local presbytery of Dalkeith, the ministers who, sit in the local court for looking at church affairs. And he said, you've already tried her and decided she's guilty. Basically, that's no fair. This is not how we're doing it. We're taking proper evidence. And the result of the way Dunfermline did this was that Gilles was acquitted. And while Dunfermline was Chancellor of Scotland, Michael showed that he really depressed the amount of witch trials in Scotland. So, that was just a completely mind-blowing start to getting interested in witches. And in this case, Gilles was accused of having summoned the devil in the form of a Highland doctor, and she was accused of having sacrificed, I think it was her daughter-in-law's stillborn baby to the devil. All complete nonsense, par for the course. But, you just look at these things and you sort of go, how do we even begin to understand this world and the people in it?
Louise, I'm in complete amazement. Did I just hear you say that the devil appeared in the form of a Highland doctor?
Yes. Now, there's a whole sort of Gaelic medical tradition, Highland doctors. And one of the other things is, even when we're talking about cases in the lowlands of Scotland, you often see, things like Ersh Marion or Irish Jonnet. So, always throughout Scotland at this time, there are Gaelic speakers, there are Highland people. And of course, as well as Highland doctors, you have Highland drovers. You have the cattle trade, which is bringing people down and up. And I often see this sort of, flux of people moving within Scotland when I'm looking at witch cases.
It's such an amazing start. So with that start, seeing that manuscript, reading about the witch trials, where did you go from there?
Well, I'd known about the witch trials beforehand because I'd done a degree in early modern history and Scottish stuff had been part of it. But, you get sucked in. And, once I met he was then Dr. Julian Goodyear, he's now Professor Julian Goodyear. Boy, I got sucked in. Michael Wasser and I edited this case for, I think it was the Scottish History Society, and Julian was the editor. And so I got sucked into talking to Julian, and I became a small part. I am the smallest part of the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft. The people who really did all the work were, Lauren Martin and Joyce Miller and Julian, and I was the sort of, bolt onto it. So I kind of orbited around that, and I sort of became, because I'm very interested in belief, I was interested in what people believed. Not just, about the piety, which I worked on. I was interested in, what do people believe about witches? What do people believe about the devil? So I just kind of naturally got sucked into it.
And if you were just talking to somebody that had never known about this before, how would you sum up what they largely believed in those times?
All depends on who you're talking about.
Right.
So I suppose if I was thinking of somebody who was, maybe just an ordinary person in a little fishing borough like Pittenweem or Anstruther, what might they believe? Well, they might believe that people could do magical harm. They could sink ships. They could bring ill luck on the men at the fishing. And if it was somebody who had, really been listening and paying attention and maybe, sort of seen a witch trial or talked to a minister about it, they might say, oh, yes, these people sell their souls to the devil. And it's the devil who gives them the power and allows them to go and sink the ships and kill our men. And you'd be very angry about it. Imagine this is somebody who could, kill your husband, leave your family starving. The other things people believe is, they believe that witchcraft can be used to kill your children. This is a society that hasn't got the safety nets, even, the flawed safety nets that we have. So if, suddenly you lose your livelihood, or, your molten grain for brewing beer and it spoils. I mean, this is bringing people into hunger and want and danger. And the fact that you think an ill-willed neighbour can just do that to you, you'd be very frightened.
You absolutely would. Louise, when you were looking at these witchcraft accusations, what is the strangest accusation you came across?
They all have their sort of things that are strange to us. I mean, I don't know if strange is the right word, but there's one case that's always stuck with me. And it's a woman called Anna Tate. She lives in Haddington, and she's found trying to end her life. She's found trying to hang herself with the strings of her headdress. And of course, 17th century society doesn't have compassion for people in these situations of despair. It thinks if you do that, you're motivated by the devil. It's a terrible crime and you'll not get a normal burial. They have really horrible beliefs on this. And once Anna's caught trying to kill herself with the strings of her headdress, the first thing people say to her is, did the devil come to you? Did you see the devil? And of course, this is somebody in despair who wants to die. So she says, oh, yes, the devil came to me. But she also gives this horrifying, sad, tragic confession. Sometimes, when people are arraigned for witchcraft trials or they're confessing in witchcraft cases, they just confess to everything. They just decide, I'm getting all this off my chest before I go to God. And she confessed how she murdered her first husband with foxglove leaves so she could marry her second husband. And then the reason why she was in such despair and trying to put an end to her life was that her daughter had got pregnant and she tried to get her daughter an abortion and her daughter had died.
Oh my goodness.
And she just wanted to die, poor Anna.
So these were true confessions as opposed to some of the confessions you read about that are obviously made up or they're said in desperation. You think these were things that she'd actually done?
Well, you see, they're not the things that people interrogating you want to hear.
No.
The people who are interrogating you want to hear, you made a pact with the devil, you had sex with the devil gave you a mark, and then you went and did horrible things. They don't want to hear your life story. I mean, I know of other cases where a woman talks about her young son dying, and she talks about it in the context of a fairy changeling, that the fairies took the son and they left a log in the cradle and the log was thrown into the fire, and you're thinking, oh, what actually happened to that wee boy? And you get other cases where people confess to things like adultery or they confess to things like child murder, but it's absolutely not what they're being asked about and not what the interrogators want to hear. One of the things you look for when you're looking for people's own voices in the witchcraft confessions is you're looking for when, so to speak, they go off-piste and they stop answering the things that tick all the boxes for the witch hunters. Fabulous case of this is Isabel Gowdy, who tells all these stories about the elf arrows and going into the fairy hills and, they've got elf bulls lowing. And, we can't quite make up our mind, or at least I can't make up my mind with the people who are interrogating Isabel. Are they sitting there going, oh, yeah, just stop it, get to the demonic pact already? Or were they people who were actually, I think Emma Wilby thinks they were interested. She wrote the book about Isabel. Were they actually sitting there going, I know we're meant to be ticking all the boxes on the witch confession, but this is so interesting. I think of her as being a sort of really great storyteller, but you sort of get these moments where you know things are not ticking the boxes. And that's the point where you think, I'm hearing this person's voice.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because the rest of the time, when they're answering the questions that they're being asked about what they did with the devil and all those sorts of things, that what you're actually hearing isn't those person's voice at all. It's the voice of the person asking the questions. Yeah, and they'll be told, whatever nonsense somebody can come up with when they're answering it of, oh, well, I don't know who those people were. They were wearing masks, or, oh, those people are all dead now. Or, they'll make up some nonsense. But, somebody tells some story from their life. There are just these moments where you sort of go, oh, gosh, I'm hearing that person's voice. That's really the thing that makes you connect with the people of that time, isn't it? When you hear the voice of the person through what's being heard. That's certainly what happened to me when I heard Sir George Mackenzie being present at a torture of a woman. I think she was probably being kept awake. And she said to the people questioning her, can you be a witch and not know it? And that's always stuck in my mind.
And there's another case, which I think it's Mackenzie writing about it later. And it's this old woman telling him, look, I confess, because who's going to give me alms? Who's going to stop me from starving? Once they think I'm a witch, they'll drive me away from the doors with it. So, you do sort of start to hear people's voices.
It's amazing. Now, you weren't just involved as part of the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, and you're very modest, I think, about your part in it, but you weren't just part of that. You also were involved in the discovery of the only grave of someone we have accused of a witch.
Well, I never like to use the word discovery, because my point would be, if you went and you asked the right people in that community, they'd have always kent about it. Because, I know myself, where my grandfather grew up, people knew all the names of the rocks down on the shore. So if I'd known who to go to and ask, I'd bet they would have known. And it was in all the local history books, describing what the stone looked like, where you might find it. So in a way, it was knowledge that was always there, and people in the community would have known it. What I basically did was jump up and down about it.
It was put on their wellies, Louise, though. No one else had put on their wellies and waded out into the water for 100 years till you did it.
We were recording. There was me and A.L. Kennedy, and I think my friend Dr. Martha McGill, who's a fantastic historian of Scotland and the supernatural.
Write down that name, Zoe.
Speak to Martha. You want Martha. And, I was the only one. Well, I was the mug who'd put on their wellies. So there's all this silty mud there. And, the thing is, my background as historian and manuscripts curator. You show me a 16th century document, I'll have a good go at reading that. I know about documents. I know nothing about stains. Nothing. That's the sort of thing geologists, archaeologists, things lying in fields, things lying on beaches. That's what they know about. I don't know about that. I was just armed with all this sort of local history. And I was thinking, right, well, it ought to be around here. Well, I'm just going to have to wade out and I'm going to have to look at it. And there was this sort of great rectangular stone. One of the local histories had described it as being like a great doorstep. I was like, that's got to be it. And it was covered in seaweed. And I thought, but that's not a normal beach stone. I mean, even me, idiot historian, I know it's not normal for beach stones to be rectangular. So, I immediately pointed that out. Douglas Spears wasn't able to come with us when we went on that recording trip. So, I emailed Douglas very excited and said, can you have a look at this? And Douglas went down with a pal and they trialed all the seaweed off. And they said, yeah, that stone didn't get there by natural means. And there's this little dimple on it, which, makes us think that's been handled by older quarrying techniques. So, we think that's it. And I thought, wow.
That must have been amazing finding that, Louise. And did you know all the history of Lilias at that time?
I knew the history of Lilias because I think at some point, when you get asked to give talks to local history societies and you go and look up all the local cases. Well, I went to school in Dunfermline, so I'm pretty sure it was one of the Dunfermline societies I was talking at, and I spoke about Lilias. So she was kind of wedged in the back of my mind. And when I came to sort of looking at, what were the beliefs that could have made them bury her like that? That was a sort of natural thing for me to want to explore, to know more about.
And can you tell us about that? What were the beliefs that caused that for her to be there?
Well, first of all, if you think somebody's committed a violent or heinous crime, you don't want them in your local kirkyard with godly, respectable people. You normally want to bury them on the boundaries. I mean, often it's done, where 3 lairds' lands meet, or things like this. But another thing is you can bury people in a very liminal way, as they say, doorstep, liminal, threshold, between the low tide mark and the high tide mark. And there was a big stone on the grave. Now, I knew from the way archaeologists write about what they call deviant burials, that sometimes stones are put on people. And it might be because they don't want that person to come back, because there was a belief in revenants. And the belief in revenants was, not like your ghost that goes through walls. It was the chunky corpse that comes back and tears you to pieces or possibly hits you with an axe if it's that kind of corpse. And so, there was a fear that corpses could reanimate. And I knew that was part of belief. in the witch hunts, because the classic thing would be that the devil could take a corpse and reanimate it and, use it to meet up with his servants, the witches. And it was Martha who said to me, do you realise there's a witch revenant tale from this time? And that was the tale of Isabel Heriot, who had been a servant to the Minister of Ormiston. And the tale is told by one of her neighbours, who says they saw Isabel as if she'd just come out of her grave with her face blackened, from her death. And, she was throwing stones at the house of the minister's family. And the neighbour, what you're meant to do if you meet a ghost or uncanny being is to charge it by the law it lives on to answer you. And the neighbour said that's what she did. And that Isabel basically gave her a pitch perfect witch confession. And this is why Isabel couldn't rest and had come back to throw stones at the minister. Now, that story is in a book called Satan's Invisible World Discovered, which is just the sort of thing you would expect to find on the bookshelf of the Minister of Toryburn at this time, Alan Logan, who we know believed in witchcraft and was very, very zealous about that. So, we have full-blown witch revenant belief going on at this time when Lilias is buried in this way between the low tide mark and the high tide mark, and this big stone is set on her. So part of it is punishing the body of somebody you think's committed a terrible crime and made themselves an outcast from the community. But, there may be more to it than that, because we know there's this revenant belief at the time.
Fascinating.
It's utterly fascinating. When we went out to look at it, it's so amazing, first of all, that it's still there. And then we hear the later stories about it being grave robbed and poor Lilias not even being free at that time to just rest in peace, as it were, or lie there in peace, having, of course, then been dug up again and her bones found their way to, I suppose, entertain in the earlier 20th century. At that time, did you know about the fact that the grave had been found at an earlier stage and it had been grave robbed?
Yes, it was part of all the local histories. What I didn't know was what we could do about it. I was lamenting the fact that the skull had gone missing to my friend Susan Morrison, who's our presenter on time travels. And, Susan was saying, oh, why don't you show that to the people at Dundee who do forensic pathology? And I said, can they reconstruct a face from a photograph? And Susan said, I think they can. And I didn't just have the photographs of the skull, which National Library of Scotland had preserved in their special collections. This is the great work that libraries do. They make these things possible. There was also in that little group of documents, there was a paper by a local doctor who'd measured the skull. They're just obsessed with measuring people's skulls for all kinds of bad reasons in the 19th century.
Was that phrenology?
We're on a bit from phrenology. It starts with phrenology, but then they get terribly into categorizing people's skulls for racist reasons or to show who's a degenerate and this sort of thing. It's all what we'd call pseudoscience. But, it meant they were obsessed with it and they were nicking skulls right, left and centre. That's part of how Lilias's skull comes to be in a museum. And so because I had this, I went to Dr. Christopher Rinn at Dundee University, and he is an expert on reconstructing people's faces for the courts. And, he does this to standards that stand up in court. And he said, yes, I can reconstruct her face. And to me, that was a completely magical moment.
It was, Lee. Thank you so, so much, because you just see kind of a lovely old woman looking at you.
Yeah, because one of the things I said to him is I tried to help him get the early 18th century headdress, but I also said, I want to see her as a local Fife pensioner. I said, can you just do her like a modern day old lady with the perm and things? And, he did. And as soon as you see that, you can just imagine her sitting next to you on the bus in Dunfermline. Maybe she's got her wee dog. She's away shopping up the town. And it was just, that's an ordinary person, Yeah. I can imagine her sitting next to me.
That's very much the connection you make, isn't it, when you see that?
Yeah.
The face of an ordinary woman. So, my goodness. So, you were involved in the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft. You found the grave of Lilias Adie. You brought her back by connecting us with the University of Dundee, and we saw her picture. What else have you done? We know that you've done a BBC show. Can you tell us a bit about that so the listeners can hear it?
Well, I lose track. I just completely lose track of all the things I do, because making radio programs is not like being an academic historian. You're putting out, more than a dozen in a year, and you're just, and many of them will have multiple items. So you're just constantly making things. We did a podcast called Witch Hunt, and the idea of that was to sort of give people a survey of the Scottish Witch Hunt. We couldn't quite do it from beginning to end because it takes a while to start up and get going. So it's generally better, let's just jump in at the Great North Berwick Witch Trials and James VI and kick it off there and take it from there, and, take people all the way through to the end of the witch hunt. But the idea was to sort of get the people who are doing the academic research on the witch hunt. Now, why? I'll tell you why. Because you want people's voices. How do you hear people's voices from the 16th and the 17th century? Well, we don't knock the tables. What we do is you have to have the skills to go into an archive, to take a manuscript, to read 16th or 17th century Scots, 16th or 17th century Scots handwriting, and you have to have done all the studying to have the context. So when you read those words, you know what those words mean, you know how to approach them. So if you want to sort of really hear the people, you have to train to do that. And you need trained people to do that. I mean, okay, if you can read Scots, you can take up a Kirk session record, you can start to puzzle out the words, you can start to read it. But putting things into the context of 17th century people and their world so that you can really hear their voices, that is something people have to immerse themselves in it to do it.
Well, it's absolutely amazing. And through the BBC show, you give people the opportunity to benefit from you having immersed yourself in it, because all they have to do is click on and listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we just wanted to get all that out there for people, because, I mean, one of the crucial things is just having the framework of it, just trying to understand this world, which it's people like you and me, but they're in a very different world with a very different framework of understanding it, and it's getting into that.
Louise, can I ask you, why do you think that it was so many women that were accused in Scotland? Why do you think it was slightly higher than in England and higher sort of generally?
Well, I mean, let's first of all say there are places where all witches are male. This is something that fluctuates. So it's going to depend on what your local stereotypes are about who is a witch, right? So, if you're up in the far north, you might think witches are all shamans. They're all male. If you're in Scotland, in what's your teaching about witches, what's your stereotype about witches. And even when we look at some of poetry from the 16th century, we can see people have stereotypes about witches as being female. And again, it can come into things like, who do you think is more likely to listen to the devil? Who do you think is more likely, to be badly behaved, to fall for the devil, to be ambitious, not to be satisfied with their lot? And, so an awful lot of this negative stereotyping points towards women. And I think that's what's going on in Scotland. You've got a well-established stereotype that, this is the sort of thing. Women aren't the people with the big swords, hitting you with the big swords. Women aren't the people, with the power, who sit as judges. Who are kings, who are earls. Well, there's some great ladies who have a lot of power, but, their roles are, they can't do as much as the men can do. So it's this idea of, so people, who don't have ready access to power, may they find ways of getting around that? Hey, make a pact with the devil. Now you've got power. Now you can get revenge on who you want to get revenge on. Not strong enough to go hit that person with a sword? Make a pact with the devil will let you curse him. There you go. So I think there's this sort of idea that it's a way in which women are much more likely to say, I'm going to go down this illegitimate route.
I've read an article by Prof. Goodyear which suggests that at least one of the forerunners, one of the 3 or 4 people that might have been the authors of the Witchcraft Act was John Knox. Now, John Knox had a particular interest in women not being in positions of power. Do you think that had any influence over the fact that it was mostly women?
No. John Knox is a really interesting case. John Knox is somebody who really respects and loves women in his life. spends endless time counselling them on their spiritual problems. I mean, so he's somebody who, within what he thinks is the sphere for godly women, he thinks women are great.
Are you saying like if they're good women, like?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, these are people who, you know, what, you've run away to leave your husband for the faith and come to Geneva. That's great. You know, it's like you've got to remember that, you know, when the Reformation is starting up, and again, when we get the pushback against the Covenanters, you'll find a lot of quite subversive, active women in these circles. But that doesn't alter the fact that they're patriarchal circles, which say, this far women and no more. Well, yeah, you're super godly, but you're not getting to be a minister. Or, you know, well, you shouldn't be a queen with all the powers of a queen. That's just not meant to be your sphere of influence. It's not meant to be what you're doing. But I mean, what Knox was most interested in was idolatry. And this is where we get into this thing like, whoa, 16th century people, what are they on? Because if, you know, you stop a person in the street today and you say, what's idolatry? They'll really have to think about it. It's one of these things where you've got to say, well, what does a 16th century person mean by that? Why is it really important to them? And it's because they think this is a key way in which you get right with God by not being idolatrous. And what that comes down to is the way you worship must be in the Bible, and it must be how the Bible says you can worship. And if it's not explicitly in the Bible, then what you're doing is idolatrous. You think you're worshiping something, but it's not God. It might be the devil. Yeah, you know, that stuff, it really insults God. It will make God hate you. It will make God hate Scotland, because we're all in it together if we're sinning and offending God. So, you know, one of the things that really upsets Knox is, are people doing idolatry? And that's one of the things that comes out in the Witchcraft Act. Don't be consulting with necromancers and things. It's wanting people not to be doing stuff that takes them away from God. And I think that's got a lot more to do with it than anything about gender.
That's great. No, that's absolutely interesting. It always struck me as really, really interesting that John Knox was kind of brave enough to say, I know God's envoy on earth somehow happens to be a woman at the moment, but are you sure he's got that right? That kind of struck me as quite a bold.
Oh, it is bold.
It also dumps him in it because, you know, once he's written this and he's very pleased with himself, well, guess what happens in England? They get a Protestant queen, Elizabeth. And all Knox's pals are getting lovely jobs in the Church of England. And he writes to Elizabeth, and it's basically, ha ha, no, mate. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not giving you a job. Thanks very much.
Yes. So, I mean, really, you know, he really dumps himself in it.
Well, I can't say personally I'm particularly upset.
No, I'm not upset either. I'm totally on Elizabeth I's side there.
Oh, Louise, we absolutely love speaking to you, and I think that you know more than most people would ever hear about the witchcraft trials, and we're so delighted that you've spent some time with us. Can you update us and tell us what it is you're doing now, and whether or not there are things witchcraft trial related that we should be expecting to see from you coming up?
Well, we probably have at least one item in the new time travel series. I'm going to speak to Dr. Kieran Jones about his research. So, you know, we'll hopefully have that coming up. I continue to work away on the things that interest me, particularly about the North Berwick witch hunt and the Setons and how that gets kicked off and how you go from people witch hunting in these wee boroughs in East Lothian, how that gets up to the royal court and to James VI thinking there've been attacks on him. So that's something I'm really interested in. And I've also been trying to sort of piece together more about Richie Graham, who's one of the accused magical practitioners in the North Berwick case, because he actually seems to have had a job as what you might call a service magician, handing out magical services to the nobility of Scotland. And I thought, well, that's a rather interesting job. I'd kind of like to know more about that.
Oh, that sounds absolutely
service
fabulous.
magician. I love that. I love that as the title. What do you do? I'm a service magician.
Do you want to find favour with the king? Here's something, touch his face with it. I've enchanted it. Do you want to see my enchanted stick? You know, I mean, you know, it's like...
Louise, I've heard that before, that one.
Yes,
there are service magicians abroad.
I didn't know there were service magicians that were asking that. Louise, thank you so much for speaking to us today. We're really grateful. First of all, we're really grateful for all the work that you have done keeping the stories of these people alive, because you really have been at the very forefront in Scotland of doing that, and you continue to do it with the programmes that you're now working on. So we're really, really grateful, and thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us today.
Thanks so much for joining us this week for our 56th podcast episode. It's been a pleasure as usual. Please do get in touch with us in all the normal places, such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I think there's now 2 TikToks. Is that correct, Claire?
We've had 2 TikToks, and I'm keen to do a third, Zoe.
Please join us next time, where Claire and myself, I don't know if I mentioned this, finalists for Scottish Women of the Year. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you, well, you'll hear us next time.
Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.